Major funding for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
You know, the surprisingly devastating effects of Hurricane Sandy a few weeks ago now on the Northeast has brought many post-storm challenges again to the surface. Things like price gouging, commercial exploitation, to name a couple of examples. Consumer protection is a hard enough science in normal situations, but during periods of chaos, it can be impossible. Hello, glad you are watching, and welcome back to the most widely watched source of Carolina public policy and business, and this time consumer protection, its ethics, and in general, how it is making our marketplaces safer. And later on, the chief of South Carolina's Department of Consumer Protection, Carri Lybarker.
Major funding also by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, health care, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising health care costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded November 2nd, 2012. On this week's program, Tom Bartholomy of the Better Business Bureau of Southern Piedmont, Dr. Daniel Wueste of Clemson University, and special guest Carri Lybarker, Administrator of the South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs.
Hello, welcome to our program. Dan, good to have you here. Tom, welcome to the program.
Glad to be here.
You know, gosh, Tom, plenty of places I want to start. You know, not long ago, Hurricane Sandy, devastating effects there, and we watched these long cars in line for gas. And, you know, we've all been through it, of course, living in the South. You know, if there is a hurricane per capita, it happens here more than it happens anywhere else. So we kind of understand that DNA. You know, when you see a disaster like that, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? You think, we're going to get calls. We're going to have to do X. What makes itself apparent during times of disaster?
Well, it's become literally that what is today's headlines becomes tomorrow's scams. The scammers are able to react just that quickly and anticipate how they can take advantage of that situation as well. And we saw it with Sandy. We see it with any natural disaster, that as the legitimate charities come out to help, and to raise funds to help those that have been affected by the disaster, that scammers come in to take advantage of it as well. During Katrina, we saw that within 5 days of that disaster, 17 websites were set up by scammers spoofing just the American Red Cross so that they could...
And what kind of money will they raise with that before they get shut down?
Millions. Literally millions. I mean,
is there any recourse for agencies to get that money back?
It's very difficult because none of them are based in the United States. Their headquarters, their operations are in Eastern Europe, South America, and so just following that money trail is difficult enough as it is. But then to actually affect any prosecution on them is almost impossible. You
know, Dan, this is a place I think I want to bring in here. When we've got. As Tom just described, natural disasters and the fallout immediately following, it makes me think that the ethics of business get shredded in environments like that when we've got so many people outside of the domestic borders of the United States putting up these fake websites. I mean, our ethics, is it more of a challenge now to find the good people than it used to be before? Is it getting harder?
I don't think it's harder to find good people. It's just that we see more bad people.
Okay, maybe that's the better question.
And it's a very sad thing that this should happen so quickly. And one of the effects is that the rest of the business community gets painted with the same brush, I fear. I think that happens in a lot of areas, so that business suffers because people get the impression, because they hear about scammers and so on, that this is going on, and the trust that would make for a healthy business relationship is jeopardized.
So to your comments, and you know, kind of getting off on the ethereal here, and it's okay, but so trust is not siloed. If someone loses trust because somebody's scamming on a Red Cross site, that's a pretty pervasive, broad-based loss of trust in business. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I think that's right. It's in a way like what happens with professions, and one of the reasons that a profession looks to have a code of ethics. All of the people in the profession are going to be affected by the behavior of any one of them, so they want to have rules that govern the activity of all. Mm-hmm. So when one doctor behaves badly or one lawyer behaves badly, people get an impression about the profession generally, and I think that happens with business, and maybe especially with those that are internet-based businesses, because that's where the major scamming would occur.
Is that in fact, is that where you see that mostly?
We do, and it's not just business, but in this case it's affecting legitimate charities. That we talk to many people, potential donors, that they call us and they say, well, I went to this site and it turned out to be just a spoof of Salvation Army, a spoof of the Red Cross. They said, well, I don't know who to trust anymore, so I'm not going to trust any of them. And you know, we tell them, no, you can't do that. There's a lot of need out there, a lot of organizations that need your donation, and so we try to stress them, give, but give wisely. Know who you're giving to, know the signs of when somebody's trying to rip you off, and know who the really good, legitimate, effective organizations are.
You know, I don't want to look at this so cynically, but are we near an inflection point here where, to the point that, you know, Tom, in your world, you get a lot of complaints, probably more than you get the good comments. And Dan, in your world, ethics is at the, you know, the point of the issue is ethics, and you talk about that a lot. Are there more and more examples of people that aren't doing the right things? And I mean, this broad-based trust, have people lost a lot of trust in, and you can see it in the election rhetoric, have people lost a lot of trust in business? More so than maybe a decade ago?
I don't have empirical evidence to back up my claim, but I think that it's probably not a whole lot different. There's been a suspicion. Well, Enron was 2001.
Sure, mm-hmm. Right.
So in that decade, I think there's been a suspicion. I don't think it's gotten greater, though we do see more bad behavior. That's the sort of thing that captures people's attention. People don't have their attention grabbed by some good news. Mm-hmm. Here's a business that's been doing their job well, has established and maintained trust for a very long time. That's yada, yada, yada. They're not interested in that. Right. Though business wouldn't be possible if it weren't generally the case that people can rely on businesses to follow through on the things that they do. When I talk with my business ethics students, and no, it's not an oxymoron, by the way, I tell them that we read so much about the bad behavior, we have to be careful not to suppose that that's most of what's going on. If it were, then commerce wouldn't be possible. In order for commerce to continue, people have to be able to work on the basis of a telephone order. The purchase orders are in the mail, the contracts haven't, the ink's not dry.
Right.
And it does.
And is there still, in your opinion, still that kind of trust out there in the marketplace?
I think it's still there.
On the word, on the phone call, verbally, that kind of thing? Tom, you not agreeing with that?
No, I do. I think that people are inherently trusting, that it's their nature to trust. But then when these situations occur and they get blown up in the media, that it just takes them aback. And, you know, some will shut down and just say, well, I'm not going to, mm-hmm. you know, I can't trust any contractor. I can't trust any, you know, name the profession. And, but then, you know, and that's part of the Better Business Bureau's job, is to connect people with businesses that they can trust. You know, that the vast majority of businesses, the vast majority of charities aren't there to rip you off. You know, they're there to make a living and to help you with whatever your situation is. And so we stress that time and time again, that, yes, you as a consumer, you have rights in the marketplace, but you also have responsibilities in the marketplace as well.
And sorry to interrupt you, but talk to that a little bit. What is that balance? And please, Dan, we've only got about a minute left. What is that place, that nexus where there are consumer rights and then consumer responsibility? It's the consumer right to be protected, but it's the responsibility to know the coffee's hot before you spill it on you and have to sue the company that served you the coffee, don't you think?
Oh, definitely. And we see too many instances of, and I swear, unless I was sitting next to you as that scammer was calling on the phone to tell you, don't do it. Put down the phone, just say no, don't do it, that they would still do it. Because it's such a compelling story, it's such a manipulative way to deal with people. But these scammers are very good at what they do, and that's selling, basically. And so if somebody's amenable to being sold, then, you know, like I said, I could be sitting on their shoulder telling them, don't do it, and they still will.
I think there's a real challenge, though, because when we begin talking about the responsibilities of the consumers, I'm reminded the old adage, in the business world, it's caveat emptor, buyer beware. And certainly we have to be cautious, responsible in what we do, but the onus isn't entirely on that side of the operation. And there needs to be a respect back and forth between the consumers and the providers of what's being consumed. Otherwise, I do think then we would be going down the road where commerce is not going to be healthy for the economy. I need to be able to trust what I'm hearing from people. And as in personal relationships, once burned, the thing to do is kind of pull back.
Right, sure.
Pull back. And then you have to try to get people, it's like reestablishing a personal relationship. A business, when something goes wrong, needs to reestablish the relationship with its customers.
In about 30 seconds, you know, we talked about WorldCon and Enron and some of those things that happened at the beginning of last a decade. It's hard to believe that. Yes. But what about the banks in 08, 09, behaving badly around making loans? I mean, we all understood that, we saw that. Have the banks learned from that? What kind of complaints, what kind of dialogue is going on now around lending and banking?
Well, I mean, their whole landscape has changed completely, and both from doing business differently because they know they have to, but then because of increases in regulation that are making them have to. So it's which is the driver? Is the driver, okay, we're responding to the marketplace because, you know, we performed poorly and we have to behave better? Or is it because the regulators are here now saying you must behave better? If you don't, we've got this whole new apparatus here to come after you if we do catch you performing poorly.
Okay, that'll be the last word. We'll bring our guest out in just a second. Guys, stay with us. Next week on this program, we do an election debrief here a couple, 2 or 3 or 4 weeks after at least the last major election cycle. The question is, when does the next major election cycle begin? Probably not far along, but election debrief with our panel. And then in 2 weeks, he is the new president of the South Carolina Technical College System. Dr. Darrell Stott will be here. Well, consumer protection, we've talked about it now for a few minutes. It sounds boring and institutional, kind of, sort of, and if you describe it just that way, then it can be what, but when you start to expand on a discussion around issues like identity theft, keeping banks and mortgage lenders honest, minimizing insurance rates, or in general being a watchdog of sorts around predatory business practices, and you start to see some value in a government agency, specifically this government agency. Joining us now is the administrator for the South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs, Carri Grube Lybarker. Carri, welcome to the program.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Carri, you've been listening to this dialogue off camera, either grimacing or squinting or laughing. I'm not quite sure what, but Carri, where is that place between what is your job to protect consumers, I'm assuming, and what is their job as consumers to know the difference between what's a scam, what's not a scam, what's right, what's wrong, and just common sense?
Yeah, at our agency, we kind of have a holistic approach just because of our mission. We have some regulatory authority that kind of tries to keep the level playing field between the business and the consumer, recognizing the level of knowledge and circumstances that lies more heavily on the business end. But education really is central to our mission and making sure that consumers are aware of the steps that they can take to protect themselves and to make mindful decisions in the marketplace.
So you lead first with education?
That is our main goal, whether it's on the business side or the education side.
And what, traditionally, let me just throw this out here because it'd be the elephant in the room if we don't talk about
Sure.
it, but your budget's been cut more than half.
Right.
Your head count's about half. And you've got to do all this with it. I mean, you have to be not just this educational resource, but I'm assuming you're also an enforcer on some degree.
We are. We regulate about 15 different industries, whether it's consumer credit sales and loans in general, mortgage brokers, pawnbrokers, physical fitness facilities, credit counselors, the list goes on and on. So we certainly do have some administration and enforcement authority there. Due to our budget cuts, we have less than half of the amount of investigators that we did prior to 2009. We've had to shift the way that we look at enforcement matters and prioritize compliance reviews and investigations. So it has definitely been kind of a rebuilding experience for us into seeing where we need to utilize our resources and what's the most effective way for us to do so.
Do you feel like, Carri, you can get back to where the agency was 5 or so years ago in effectiveness? Is that the plan?
I don't know that we want to be where we were 5 years ago because it is a little bit of a different landscape. At that time period, our mortgage broker licensing industry was ginormous. Right now, we're at a fraction of what that is. So we're trying to focus more to make sure that we are touching each of the industries that we regulate. Before, we were kind of having to spend all of our time on some bad apples, not being able to go out to everybody to make sure that they are all complying with the law, not just the ones that are popping up through a complaint or that we're doing a regulatory review and all of a sudden we realize that they're not doing what they are supposed to be doing. So we're kind of looking at the world, at our mission, at our agency through different glasses.
Tom?
Carri, what we've seen with the Better Business Bureau, and we serve both North and South Carolina parts of it, that, and you mentioned priorities and how you're trying to prioritize enforcement now, but we see a lot of North Carolina businesses that are set up to prey on people in South Carolina because the laws are different between the states, and likewise businesses in South Carolina that are set up specifically to prey on North Carolinians because, again, the differences in the laws. Do you have cross-border cooperation between agencies to try to impact those bad players?
Yeah, we certainly do, and especially with the North Carolina Attorney General's office, we have conference calls, and no matter who the regulatory agency is that we see, or if it's the consumer protection arm in another state, we certainly do reach out, recognizing that you have to leverage resources to be able to make an impact, especially in the area of scams.
You know, as a quick follow-up to that, Carri, I'm not trying to talk you out of a job here, but
Sure.
in North Carolina, that function is done in the AG's office, the Attorney General's office.
Right.
Wouldn't it make sense to give you more resources and more reach to be part of the South Carolina Attorney General's office?
I think that the way that we are set up as an independent agency benefits the consumers that we serve, the businesses we serve. Because we are independent, I'm not an elected official. We have a commission that is made up of 4 members appointed by the governor and 4 by the General Assembly, and then we have the Secretary of State ex officio. And I think that kind of a model allows us to be independent in our decisions and making sure that we are allowed to set an agenda as it moves and as we move through these difficult times.
Dan?
I'm wondering about the difference between protecting consumers from scammers and protecting consumers from reputable businesses. Seems to me a rather different sort of project. With the scammers, I suppose the best thing you can do is have some kind of rule with a sanction attached to it so that if they fail to comply with it and you catch them, you can punish them. But with reputable businesses, I'm thinking what you would be looking to have is they're being motivated to be thinking about consumer protection without the need for regulations, laws, which sometimes I think are seen rather in the same way as what parents say to teenagers. It's said in a well-meaning way, but it meets with resistance. The teenager gets her back up or his back up. Businesses, politicians get their backs up. Oh, these regulations, they're all bad. Now, I think we need them for the scammers, but what can we do to motivate businesses to be concerned about the protection of their consumers without having to have something that's like parental direction?
Yeah, I think that that's an interesting perspective because a lot of the laws that we have, you bring everybody to the table who's involved, the current industries, to get everybody's play. We're not an agency to where we ever say, this is a law that we think should go into effect, this is why we're right, let it be done. We always bring interested parties to the table to try to flesh out what the business industry itself thinks needs to occur. Because as I talked about a level playing field between the business and the consumer, the businesses want that same kind of level playing field, and they don't want business A to be able to advertise, this is the greatest product in the world and you're going to get all these benefits that it actually won't provide, that takes away their customers to where they would be providing a better service, actually being a little bit more legitimate in that practice, but the bad apples are taking away their business because of that. So I think that there's a balance. We certainly don't want to put people out of business whenever there's regulation imposed, but again, the level playing field at the consumer level and the business-to-business level, I think, is the goal that's meant to be achieved.
And to take that a little bit farther, you've got this balance of compliance. Okay, so try to find that place between what is business development and what is consumer protection. Where is that place?
It probably meshes with a lot of our.
But let me. I'm sorry, Carrie. But let me ask you: is there a formula, or is it based industry to industry, or case to case?
I would say oftentimes it's industry to industry, but you could delve down a little deeper to go case by case basis, dependent on if there are certain issues that we're seeing that we think education units should be provided to that business because we're seeing the same kind of issues evolve. And then also with the consumer complaints that we get in or the questions that we get in for consumers, to be able to tailor some educational materials for them to give them a little bit more information whenever they're providing or trying to buy a product or service from one of those businesses.
With the BBB, I mean, we see it quite often that, we don't have any legal authority. We can't say, business, you must do this. But yet we were able to resolve about 90% of the complaints that come to us. But then being able to have Consumer Affairs or the Attorney General there to say, okay, help.
Right. Because
we've got this business that just doesn't care. And if they're just saying, well, the heck with the Better Business Bureau, the heck with whomever else, to be able to have that backup. And I think that goes to Chris's point of, where's that tipping point of, they're not necessarily scammers. They're businesses that are maybe trying to take advantage of the situation. And I mean, what do you do? I know you work cooperatively with BBBs across the state. I mean, what do you do when you get that type of referral?
Yeah, we'll look to see at our statutes to see if there may be a law that could have been violated. We too take complaints, whether or not it's within our regulatory scope. If another state or federal agency regulates the business that's being complained against, we refer it out. Of course, if we regulate it, it goes to the attorneys within our legal division to review for potential violations or to delve deeper into seeing if there's any other issues. Because oftentimes, as you're aware too, when a consumer complains about something, oftentimes that's not the real complaint. When you look at the contract or kind of look through the paperwork that's been submitted, we as regulators realize that there's more of a problem out there. And then of course, if the business is not regulated, which more times than not, it's not, then our complaint analysts engage in voluntary mediation, have been very successful, as the Better Business Bureau has, with getting satisfactory resolutions for both the business and the consumer. We recognize the business isn't always wrong, the consumer is not always right. We have to take a look at everything and get a full picture of what exactly happened. Do the best that we can.
Excuse me again. That's
Sure.
interesting. So, Carrie, is the complaint normally not even close? I mean, if you have a complaint, how many times out of 10 will the consumer be kind of accurate and right about the complaint?
They're fairly accurate a majority of the time, but it's the fact that they often are scratching the surface because there may be other issues underneath that they don't have the requisite knowledge to recognize.
We've got about a minute left, and sorry, Dan, I'm going to have to keep control of this because we'll run out of time, and I'll be the one that gets in trouble because we run over. So, in less than a minute now, Carrie, what's the trend? What are you seeing out there since 08, 09? We've had a storm. We're past the election cycle. What's the long-term trend? Are people complaining more or less in about 15 seconds?
More of the complaints, I'd say more. There's more complaints that we're seeing, but a lot of them are more scam related. Unfortunately, I think as was mentioned earlier, scam artists are following the headlines, and there are a lot of headlines out there for them to attach onto. So we've seen an increase in telemarketing scams, telephone scams, email scams, all the above.
Okay, we'll have you back to keep that list going. Carri, thank you for being on the program.
Thank you.
Dan, welcome. Good to have you here. Tom, nice to see you. Until next week, good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.